But to what will I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they said, he has a demon. And the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Then verse 25. At that time Jesus said, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent, and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest to your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This is the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Praise be to you, O Christ. Thank you. You may be seated.
I'd like to read one more passage from the Gospels in Luke chapter 12, verse 48, the last part of that verse, which says, from everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. And from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. Hear those words again. From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. From the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. One of the most difficult things that we human beings have been given is the freedom to choose. Choices are not easy. In fact, I think quite often about the story of one of my boys when he was just a little fella coming and watching, and I've told this before, but he watched a whole video on parenting that I was watching. I thought he would get bored and leave. It was 45 minutes long, and he sat on the couch and watched the whole thing. He got up and shook his head like this, walked to the door of the hallway, turned around, looked at me and said, Dad, that sounds just like you. Choices, choices, choices. I hate choices. And so do we all. We love freedom, but we hate having to make a choice because freedom has an inherent responsibility in it. We soon discover as we grow in life that freedom is not as free as we thought it was. We may be free to make a decision, but every freedom that we make a decision for has its consequences, good or bad. We can do things that bring good consequences, or we can do some things that bring poor consequences. And while there are many things that we have no control over in life, we do have control over our choices and what we choose and how we choose to live our lives, what decisions we make. And America is the land of the free and the home of the brave. It is a day when we remember the great history that we have. But sometimes we are lazy about that history. We simply think about all the things that others have sacrificed, and we are modestly thankful. But the only way we can truly be thankful, the only way we can truly express our thanksgiving for what we have been given and what literally has been handed to us, what we were born into. We had no choice about being born into this world. We could have been born somewhere else without the benefits that we have. But when we are given this great gift, we must take responsibility for it. And we must do all that we can to preserve the freedoms that we have been given. Sometimes we reduce that freedom to kind of a black and white decision. We take a political view of that and we think, well, certainly we can, if we could just get our politics right, the world would be right. But I want to suggest to you today that even if we could get the best political system in the world, which we have, I believe, working correctly as we might think it ought to work, it would still need something more. It would be missing something, because there is a moral compass that has to undergird every system in the world. Imperfect systems with a high moral compass may be more righteous than we are if we have a great system with a low moral compass. A low moral compass lets us make decisions, and so often the way we want to decide about morality is we want to point out those other people's sins that are not what our sins are. I get frustrated with people who want to quote from Romans chapter 1 and never read Romans chapter 2. For Romans chapter 2 says, "Woe to you who point out someone else's sins, for you are guilty of the same thing, and you will not be held blameless." And immediately we want to say, "But we're not guilty. We didn't do those things." But the reality is that we human beings all stand in need of the guidance that only God gives to us. Only God can give the guidance that the world needs. We cannot find it simply in a political system. When we started out, we talk about our Constitution, and it's really a wonderful document. The Declaration of Independence is related to this weekend, and it too is a marvelous document. In the history of the world, those documents stand unique. They are tremendous documents. They are worthy of our reading and studying. But if you go to any constitutional lawyer, you will discover that there is not simply one document that we go back to, but a whole room full of laws that we have developed to interpret the Constitution by. So the Constitution itself can become skewed and not as clear as it might have been when it was just a simple document. Sometimes the same thing is true about our faith. We have put so many layers on our faith, so many layers on what we believe and the way we practice our faith and how we go about our faith, that we forget the most important aspects of faith. The most important aspects of faith is not what we do to be religious, but what we do to carry the good news, the gospel, into the world. We as Christians are given a task. Sometimes we miss the opportunity that is ours. I think about Bruce Olson, who I met when I was 16 years old. Bruce was called of God to go as a 19-year-old to the Montolone Indians in South America. He had read about these people, that there had never been anyone from the outside who had been able to go into their culture and survive. They were headhunters. They were people who were secretive. They were in the rainforest of South America. And yet Bruce felt called to go to these people. He spent his life, he is still among the Montolone Indians in South America. I met Bruce when I was 16 in the early 60s. How could he do this? Not only has he done that, but Bruce has been captured by communist guerrillas and tortured for being a Christian missionary in South America, among the Montolone Indians. He was rescued because all of the tribes threatened all-out warfare if the communist guerrillas didn't release Bruce Olson. But during the time that he was captive, and this is what I want you to hear, Bruce Olson witnessed to his captors. And although they tortured him in the beginning, it was his response to them that let them change, that let them be different, that let them become different in the way that they treated him. And literally his guards, some of them, came to believe and trust in Christ and began to treat him with graciousness. How many of us would do the same? How many of us would turn bitterness into something else? How many of us would witness to an illegal alien? I know this is a real touchy subject and we've all got our opinions on it. When we want to build a wall and close the borders, I think sometimes when we build walls, we have to remember that we build walls that shut others out, but they also shut us in. And we miss the opportunities that might be ours as well. What we've known in my lifetime, all my lifetime, was migrant workers. Southern California depended on migrant workers to gather the crops that no one else wanted to gather. They came from the same places that many of the Mexicans, many of the Hispanics are coming from. And we brought them in truckloads and boats, and brought them in to do the work that needed to be done in short periods of time, and they were glad to do that. I'm not promoting anything in particular today, but I'm saying to us as a church that sometimes we're glad for people to come in and wash our dishes and work in our yards, legal or illegal, if they will do it cheaper than anybody else. But we forget that we have a message to give to people, and that message is greater than what we're getting from them. We have a message and a responsibility of freedom that says that no matter who we come in contact with, whether they be friend or foe, whether they be legal or illegal, we as the Church of Jesus Christ have a responsibility to carry the good news into the world, and that is the power of God that transforms the world. I love hearing the stories of the soldiers on the battlefield, some of those Christian soldiers who have taken time to get to know the people in the village, especially those stories that have come out of Iraq, as the soldiers have made a difference in the villages where they've served, gotten to know the people and begun to play with the children and make friends with them, and see in that the opportunity to build a relationship that is beyond the reason that we went there simply to keep peace by power. Oh, or is that also a power? Is there a power in the love of God that we sometimes forget? On this weekend in which we celebrate the great reality of our nation, the great truth of our nation, the great gift of our nation, the love of God must not take a second place. The way of Christ must not take a second place. And when we talk about morality, we must not forget that it's not just those obvious sins that we see so well recorded on television and on radio and talked about in various venues and emailed about all over the country, but that the sins that we also commit. James 4:17, for example, says, "To the one that knows to do good and does it not, it is sin." Failure to show compassion, failure to show kindness, failure to return good for evil, failure to pray for our enemies, failure to sometimes just plain turn the other cheek and walk away rather than striking back. Those are also part of our morality, part of what makes us great. I've known a few people in my life that stand out. I won't call any names, but among those are some very wealthy friends, very wealthy people, people who have more money than I can think about having, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And every one of those persons that I'm thinking about right now are persons who have had a sense of responsibility and generosity that has exceeded what I could have imagined. I remember sitting down and talking with one of them one day about a ministry in Midtown in Jackson. And I asked for his support. And he sat down and let me describe the whole ministry. There was a church that was being closed, Capitol Street Church, and we were considering what we could do in mission using that building. It was a great facility. And he looked at me and he said, "Sam," he said, "that building is a black hole. You can put a lot of money in buildings, and I won't give you anything for that. But if you want to do ministry in Midtown, I'll support the ministry, and I'll help you." And he did. And he did. Let me tell you a little bit about that ministry. We started a Saturday night service for people who lived in shelters in Midtown. Shelters. They're not going to make very much contribution to the church, are they? We would walk around the neighborhoods and invite people. We came up with about as many children as we did adults. And so Lizzie Cooper, a street minister, came and helped me with the children on Saturday night. And she would take the children with a few adults, and we would have about 100 children and about 100 to 120 adults from the shelters. Their favorite song, want to know what it was, choir? Want to know what it was? I Got Jesus on the Main Line. That was their favorite song. And I didn't know that song, but they taught it to me. I've got Jesus on the main line. And they taught it to me because that was their need. They wanted to know that somehow when they reached out that they could find that God was there in their brokenness and in their hurt. Sometimes they would come and bear witness and stand up for prayer and ask for prayer. And when they would give testimonies, almost always there would be some who would stand up and they would say, I just thank God I woke up this morning. And I can't tell you how many of those people that said that were people who slept in boxes and under some shelter that they found, or slept on a park bench in Smith Park, right outside the governor's mansion, right across the street from our church. There were others who stood up and said, I want us to pray for Susie or Bill or Tom. They messed up this week. They're at University Hospital trying to get dried out or sobered up. They've been sober for 2 months and they messed up again. And we would stop and pray for Susie or Bill or Tom on that Saturday night. One day I was in a hurry. I'd been at Galloway for all morning and I needed to get to the bank before noon. And so I started walking downtown to Trustmark, and I walked across Smith Park, and there was a man with a white beard. I recognized him, an elderly man who was sleeping on the park bench in the sun in the winter. It was cold. And he had himself covered up with newspapers. But the sun was warm, and it was a beautiful day, really, a winter day. And I started to wake him up and say something to him because he came every Saturday night to the service. But I didn't. I was in too big a hurry, so I started to pass by. And he stopped me. He woke up and sat up. He said, good morning. He was still waking up. And I stopped and chatted for a few minutes. We talked. And then I started to walk away, and when I did, he said, in a voice that I almost didn't hear what he said. He said, what I've heard all my life in the church. I enjoy the service. I enjoy the service. What he meant was, I enjoy the service because it has a place for somebody like me. Our history in this country is we're all immigrants, aren't we? We all came from somewhere else. Very few of us are Native Americans. Some may be. You may even have a little blood in you, and you can be proud of that, of those who lived in this country. But most of us came from Europe, some from Asia. We came from all over the world and settled here and found a home, the home of the free, the land of the brave. We came here to find a place. And the church, we as God's people have a responsibility, a moral, ethical responsibility because of what we believe, to offer a place here to those who feel left out. Responsibility takes us a long way. What responsibility do we have to communities? I've said this before, and it's true for all of us. I can't point a finger at anybody else. We all feel it. We all, in this day and time, are bottom line driven. We're bottom line people. We look to see if the market affected our 403B in the case of ministers, or 401Ks in the case of most of the rest of you. We look to see what it left us with. Are we going to have enough? Will we have enough to take care of ourselves? What happened to praying, give us this day, what is it? Our daily bread? A reminder that we depend upon God for even something so simple as daily bread, manna in the wilderness, learning to depend upon God. And yet, and I'm one of those who's chief among you. I'm not pointing a finger at anybody else. It's so easy to become a bottom line person, concerned about what I have or don't have, and ignore the needs of the rest of the world. But I come back to that passage that we read, to whom much has been given, much will be required. Have you thought about it lately? Do you know what it would be like to be among the poor of the world? We sometimes think that the poor of the world live in a place that maybe doesn't have air conditioning. It doesn't. Well, we think that the poor of the world live in a place that doesn't have adequate heat. It doesn't. We think that the poor of the world maybe live in a place that has cardboard over the windows, probably. But do we know that the real poor of the world, that the way to describe yourself as one of the world's poor would be to burn your house down and take a few things that are left out of that, maybe a few pieces of metal, maybe a few things that you could gather from the scraps of something that someone else has thrown away and make you a lean-to and move into the backyard? Move in maybe with a rickety old bicycle and a few pieces of potato skins that you could make into soup and one tin can that you could cook it in, and move in with your pets and your family, your kids, into that one little lean-to. That's what it's like to be among the poor of the world. I've been in the refugee camps in the Middle East. I've seen where, before the UN went into those camps and expanded them, where 10 families used one toilet, and the only shower was an occasional hose that was turned on where people could get under it. I've been in those camps. I wouldn't want to live there, and neither would you. I say that to say that we all, no matter how modest our circumstances are, every one of us are among the wealthiest people in the world. We are wealthy, and we must not forget. Do you remember the story of Lazarus and Diabetes? Lazarus was a poor man that lived at Diabetes Gate. Diabetes was a wealthy man. He was a wealthy man who every day passed by Lazarus, the beggar, and ignored him. The dogs came and licked Lazarus' sores. Lazarus died and went to heaven. And Diabetes died in that parable and went to hell. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, Jesus said, being in torment. And he saw Lazarus in Abraham's bosom. And he said, could you send Lazarus to dip his finger in the water and touch it to my tongue? Do I think Jesus was trying to tell us that if we have failed, if we have missed out and not noticed Lazarus at our gate, that he's going to send us to hell? No, I don't. I believe he's trying to tell us that we're going to be miserable when we recognize that when our eyes are open and we see what we could have done with what we have, that I will weep and so will you. I believe that he's trying to tell us that Lazarus is at our gate, and the internet brings Lazarus to our gate. We can't ignore the poor of the world. We see it. The world is a smaller place because of what we have today. What we didn't recognize when the difficulties in Egypt were so pronounced on television is that much of that among the masses of poor, there was an intelligentsia of young people who were educated and part of the university who began the movement. But the masses of the poor were there because they had no bread to eat. And when they brought the truckloads of bread to feed the people, they began to go home. We can't ignore that. We are a great nation. But if we want to be great, we must remember the least of those who are among us and the least of those in the world. We must not become weary in well-doing, as the Bible teaches. We must not become tired of doing good because we think it does no good. We must continue as Jesus did, to be a people who hold up a high standard as a way of life, who are willing to do what we can to help those who need us. And sometimes that's not meaning giving a handout to someone. Sometimes it means giving a job to someone. Sometimes it means teaching someone how to fish instead of giving them a fish, or teaching them how to plant potatoes instead of giving them a potato. Whatever it means for us, whatever that is, whatever God brings to us as an opportunity, we must see morality in this country as more than cataloging a list of sins that we think ourselves innocent of. For a great nation must accept the freedom of responsibility, the freedom to make good choices, the freedom of righteousness, the freedom to be a people worthy of the inheritance that we have been given. They say in family systems that the first generation makes the money, the second one enjoys it, and the third one loses it. I don't know if that's true. I think we've all seen it at times. But if you start counting the generations from the beginning of America to now, the question is not which generation will lose it. The question really is, will we in our generation and our time accept the responsibility that others have accepted before us? Will we take freedom seriously? Will we take it as a precious gift to be nurtured and cherished and protected? Will we take it as a responsibility and admit that we are the people of God, and that even if no one else does what is right, we must. And we must use every opportunity that we can to spread the good news. In just a moment, Lily's going to sing for us one of our favorite patriotic songs, God Bless America. And when she does, I want you to think about it in this way. In the Old Testament, when Joshua, and by the way, Joshua put our American flag in place today, so it's very appropriate. The young man that placed it, his name was Joshua. And when the Joshua of the Bible led the people into the promised land, he divided the Levites into two groups. On Mount Gerizim, he placed the priests who were to read the blessing of God. This is what God will do for you if you keep God's commandments. On Mount Ebal, he placed the priests who read the warnings, the curses they're called. This is what will happen to you if you fail to heed the way of God. It was a place to walk between, to remember that on one side, the same truth, the same reality is there. If we squander our freedom, if we abuse our freedom, if we throw it away, it will curse us. But if we obey the way of God, it will bless us. Let us choose.